They say men are strong, logical, unshaken, but that's a lie taught early, buried deep, and reinforced by everything around them. From the moment a boy starts becoming aware of himself, he's handed an invisible script. Be confident, be charming, be useful, be the man women want, but never question the system that taught you those rules. Never ask why your worth depends on how well you play the part. Because the truth is, society doesn't want men to look too closely at the mirror. That mirror shows too much. What's real, what's broken, and what's been manipulated to keep them obedient. The mirror men aren't supposed to hold up isn't physical, it's psychological. It reflects the invisible training men go through, the quiet conditioning that makes them perform instead of exist. From locker rooms to love songs, from Hollywood scripts to social media captions, the message is constant. Prove your worth to earn love. Be the provider, the hero, the savior, the rock. Don't cry, don't doubt, don't stop. The more you achieve, the more you'll be loved. The more you suppress, the more you'll be respected. But that's the trap. The moment men buy into this illusion, they become dependent on the validation they were told to earn. Women don't want men to watch this not because they fear the truth, but because the truth changes the balance. When a man starts seeing clearly, he stops chasing illusions. He stops interpreting silence as mystery, manipulation as affection, or rejection as motivation. He starts understanding that most of what he's been told about love, attraction, and masculinity was never about truth, it was about control. Not malicious control, but social conditioning. A script so normalized that breaking it looks like rebellion. Men are taught to give, to fix, to prove, to chase, while women are taught to choose. It's a subtle but powerful dynamic. One gives endlessly, the other evaluates endlessly. When a man doesn't hold up the mirror, he remains blind to this structure. He thinks he's pursuing love, but he's actually performing for approval. Every gym session, every expensive dinner, every unspoken insecurity becomes part of the show. And the applause, it's conditional. It lasts only until the performance falters. But the day a man looks into that mirror, really looks, everything changes. He starts seeing the fatigue behind the chase. He realizes that love built on performance isn't love. It's emotional labor disguised as romance. He begins to see how society engineered this imbalance, how validation became the drug and approval the currency. And the moment he withdraws from that economy, he becomes dangerous, not to women, but to the illusion. Because a man who no longer needs to be chosen is a man who finally chooses himself. That's what makes this mirror powerful. It's not about ego, it's about awareness. Awareness dismantles manipulation. Awareness breaks patterns. Awareness replaces desperation with calm. When a man knows who he is without needing applause, he stops bending to fit expectations. He no longer plays the game of emotional supply and demand. He becomes sovereign, not arrogant, grounded, not performative. Society doesn't celebrate that kind of man because he can't be sold to. He doesn't chase trends, he doesn't crave validation, and he doesn't crumble under rejection. He sees through the glamour of approval, and that makes it unpredictable. The system thrives on predictable men. Men who buy to impress, men who perform to belong, men who fear being unloved. The mirror breaks that predictability. It reveals the man behind the mask, stripped of pretense, raw and awake. Women don't want men to watch this video because awareness changes the dynamic. Not in a war of the sexist kind of way, but in a psychological sense. When men wake up, relationships shift, games lose their power. Love stops being transactional. The dance between genders becomes honest, sometimes brutally honest. And that honesty is uncomfortable, especially for those who benefited from confusion. The mirror doesn't tell men to distrust women. It tells them to trust themselves, to stop outsourcing their worth, to stop believing that masculinity is a currency to trade for affection. It teaches them that love, real love, begins when performance ends. When a man no longer performs, he connects from authenticity. And authenticity is rare, almost alien in a world addicted to illusions. This isn't about blame, it's about awakening. Men were never meant to live blind. They were meant to see clearly, through manipulation, through conditioning, through the noise of expectation. The mirror men aren't supposed to hold up shows them who they truly are when the applause stops, when the mask falls, when the need to impress finally dies. And what remains isn't weakness or rebellion, it's truth. A quiet, grounded truth that doesn't need validation, doesn't seek permission, and doesn't play the game anymore. That's why this mirror is feared. Because once a man sees himself clearly, he can't be controlled by illusions ever again. Every man grows up with a silent performance he's expected to master. It starts before he even realizes it, before he understands what strength, confidence, or love truly mean. The performance of perfect masculinity isn't something he chooses, it's something handed to him like a costume he's told to wear for life. Be strong but gentle, confident but humble, dominant but not intimidating, ambitious but never too selfish. It's a contradictory script that no one can fully live up to, yet every man feels pressure to follow. Society rewards the mask more than the man. The applause comes not from authenticity, but from how well he performs. From a young age, boys learn that emotions are liabilities, crying is weakness, vulnerability is unattractive, doubt is failure. So they swallow their fear, bury their confusion, and learn to smile through pain. They grow up thinking composure equals control, and control equals respect. But in the process, they lose touch with something essential, their humanity. They start believing their worth is measurable only through strength, achievements, and approval. The deeper they dive into the performance, the further they drift from themselves. The world tells men that to be loved, they must first be admired. That love comes after success. The result: men chase validation disguised as ambition. They work harder, earn more, lift heavier, and speak louder, yet feel emptier. Every external win brings only temporary relief because the applause fades and the performance must continue. No one tells them the truth: the mask never comes off. The moment they stop performing, the world stops watching, and that silence terrifies them. This is why men are often exhausted without understanding why. They've been running a marathon for approval their entire lives. They perform for women, for peers, for society, and even for themselves. The version of masculinity they were sold was never real. It was a marketplace ideal. Confidence became branding. Kindness became strategy. Even love became a performance expressed through gestures that proved devotion rather than feelings that revealed depth. Men learn to love with effort, but not with presence. They learn to give, but not to feel. The tragedy is that women often reinforce this without realizing it. They say they want honesty, but recoil when men show uncertainty. They say they want emotional depth, but admire emotional control. They say they want a strong man, but rarely define what strength truly means. So men keep performing, trying to be both the protector and the poet, the provider and the dreamer. But no one can sustain that forever. The performance always cracks. And when it does, the man underneath doesn't know who he is anymore. The illusion of perfect masculinity has never been about men being strong. It's been about keeping them predictable. A man chasing approval is easy to guide. He buys, he competes, he conforms. But a man who stops performing, who no longer measures himself through the lens of others, is uncontrollable. He's calm, grounded, and difficult to manipulate. He doesn't need validation because he's found value. That's what makes him powerful, not the image, but the awareness behind it. When a man drops the performance, it feels like death at first, the death of ego, of the ideal self, of everything he thought made him lovable. But what comes after that death is life, real life. He begins to feel again, not in the dramatic sense, but in the human sense. He realizes strength isn't the absence of emotion, it's the courage to face it. Confidence isn't about dominance, it's about alignment. And love isn't about being needed, it's about being seen. Men fear being seen because they've never practiced it. They've practiced being admired, desired, respected, but not seen. To be seen is to be vulnerable, uncertain, imperfect. But that's where authenticity lies. The performance of perfect masculinity keeps men safe from judgment, but it also keeps them distant from truth. It's armor that protects but also imprisons. And every man must decide at some point, does he want to be perfect or does he want to be free? Freedom begins when the act ends. When a man stops rehearsing the role and starts living the reality, when he accepts that being whole is better than being impressive, that strength is not what he shows, but what he holds. That real masculinity isn't about conquering others, it's about mastering himself. The performance might earn applause, but it never earns peace. And peace, in the end, is what every man is really chasing beneath all the noise. So when the mask finally falls, when the stage lights fade, what's left isn't weakness, it's truth. A man stripped of pretense, unafraid of his depth, untethered from approval. That man doesn't need to perform perfect masculinity because he embodies something far greater, imperfect humanity. And that's the kind of man no one can control because he's no longer playing the role they are. Most people don't fall in love, they fall into dependency and call it love. It starts innocently, even beautifully, with connection, excitement, and the feeling of being finally understood. But beneath the surface, what many call love is often an emotional transaction, a subtle exchange of needs, fears, and validation. It's not two people growing together, but two people filling each other's emptiness, mistaking comfort for connection and attachment for affection. Emotional dependency feels like love because it mimics its intensity, but it's not built on freedom. It's built on fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. And anything built on fear will eventually suffocate the very connection it was meant to protect. From an early age, we're taught to equate love with need. The more you need someone, the more it proves your devotion. The more you can't live without them, the deeper your love must be. But what if that's not love at all? What if that's just addiction wearing a romantic mask? True love liberates. It allows both people to exist fully without ownership. Dependency, on the other hand, binds. It turns love into a contract of mutual insecurity. You keep me from feeling lonely, and I'll keep you from feeling inadequate. It's not partnership, it's survival disguised as intimacy. For men especially, this dynamic runs deep. They're often taught that their emotional fulfillment depends on being needed. The idea that a woman's approval, affection, or presence validates their worth becomes embedded in their psyche. They start believing that without her, they are incomplete. So they chase love not from abundance, but from emptiness. They confuse being chosen with being loved and being depended on with being valuable. That's why when relationships end, so many men feel like their identity has been ripped away. They didn't just lose a person, they lost their sense of self. The irony is that this dependency can feel intoxicating. The highs are euphoric, the lows devastating. It mirrors addiction perfectly, the craving, the withdrawal, the desperation for reassurance. And just like any addiction, it becomes harder to see clearly while you're inside it. You start making compromises that betray your truth. You stop being yourself and start being what you think the other person needs. You justify the imbalance because the fear of losing love feels worse than losing yourself. But that's the quiet tragedy. Slowly, love becomes a cage built out of emotional need. Most relationships that begin with dependency end with resentment. At first, the dependency feels like closeness, constant communication, deep emotional sharing, being each other's everything. But over time, it becomes suffocating. One person begins to feel drained from carrying the other's emotional weight, while the other feels abandoned when their partner needs space. The relationship that once felt like safety now feels like imprisonment, yet neither can easily walk away, because leaving would mean facing the one thing both have been avoiding themselves. Love without self-awareness becomes an emotional contract of unconscious wounds. We seek in others what we have not given ourselves. We seek validation when we don't value ourselves. We seek security when we haven't built inner peace. We seek comfort when we're unwilling to sit with discomfort. And when we call this seeking love, we trap both people in a cycle of dependency that feels meaningful but never matures. Real love doesn't fill your void. It makes you aware of it and invites you to heal it. It doesn't complete you. It meets you where you are, whole or broken, and walks beside you, not in front of you or behind you. When men begin to see this pattern, something radical happens. They stop mistaking emotional chaos for passion. They stop confusing possessiveness with devotion. They start realizing that the highest form of love isn't about merging with another. It's about maintaining connection without losing individuality. Love becomes less about needing and more about choosing. Choosing to stay not because you can't live without them, but because you genuinely want to share your life with them. That's the difference between attachment and love. One clings, the other respects. This truth is uncomfortable because it exposes how fragile most modern relationships are. We're surrounded by stories that glorify dependency, songs that say, "I can't live without you," movies that celebrate suffering as proof of love, cultures that equate self-sacrifice with loyalty. But real love doesn't demand self-erasure, it demands self-knowledge. And when you love from self-awareness, you don't chain the other person to your happiness. You build a bond that exists without ownership, without control, without fear. Emotional dependency is the counterfeit currency of love. It looks valuable, it feels intense, but always devalues over time. True love, on the other hand, doesn't cost your peace. It expands it. It doesn't require losing yourself. It helps you find yourself deeper. And the moment you stop needing love to complete you, you finally become capable of giving love freely. That's when love transforms from dependency into devotion, from fear into freedom. Because only when you no longer need someone to make you whole can you truly meet them as a whole person. That's the kind of love that doesn't fade, lips, because it's not built on what you lack, it's built on what you become. Power in relationships is rarely about who speaks louder, earns more, or leads the way. It's about who holds influence over emotion, who shapes the atmosphere, who dictates the rhythm of connection, who decides when closeness happens and when distance is given. This isn't the kind of power that comes from control or aggression. It's quieter, softer, and infinitely more effective. It operates through attention, validation, and emotional cues. The person who can create emotional uncertainty in the other, who can make them feel wanted one moment and invisible the next, holds the real power. And in today's world, this power often flows in ways most men don't even realize. Modern relationships have evolved from survival partnerships to psychological exchanges. What once was a union built on necessity has become a dance of emotional leverage. In that dance, control isn't about domination. It's about perception. Whoever is less emotionally invested holds the upper hand. Whoever can withhold affection without breaking feels safer, stronger. Men conditioned to chase approval often end up on the reactive side of this equation. They mistake emotional intensity for connection and fail to see how their desire to please, fix, or impress can be turned into a lever of control. Attention has become the new currency. In the digital age, it's even more powerful than money. A single message, a like, or a moment of silence can shift the emotional landscape between two people. Women, often more attuned to emotional nuance, understand this power intuitively. They know that presence and absence, warmth and withdrawal, can sculpt behavior more effectively than confrontation ever could. So when a man doesn't recognize the emotional economy he unknowingly becomes a participant in his own manipulation. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Influence isn't inherently malicious, it's human. Everyone does it, consciously or not. But the imbalance comes when one person builds their emotional stability on maintaining that control while the other builds their self-worth on receiving approval. The dynamic becomes parasitic instead of symbiotic. The more one craves reassurance, the more the other silence becomes powerful. The more one gives, the more the other learns that withholding earns them influence. What starts as affection slowly turns into a behavioral system, reward and withdrawal, warmth and coldness. And most people mistake this push and pull for passion. Men who operate from emotional dependency are the easiest to sway. They rate affection as progress, distance as punishment. They analyze every text, tone, or expression, trying to decode what they did wrong. But the truth is, they did nothing wrong. They just don't understand the structure of the game. Emotional power isn't granted. It's taken the moment someone realizes they can affect your peace. Once your happiness becomes dependent on someone's response, they no longer need to demand control, you give it willingly. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is its invisibility. Unlike physical or financial dominance, emotional influence leaves no marks. It hides behind phrases like, "you're too sensitive" or "you're overthinking." It keeps men second-guessing their instincts, making them doubt their emotional intelligence. Over time, this erodes self-trust, the most essential foundation of masculine stability. A man who doubts his perception becomes malleable, uncertain, compliant. And once a man is trained to seek approval instead of truth, he's no longer leading his life, he's reacting to someone else's narrative. But awareness breaks the pattern instantly. When a man starts noticing how emotional energy shifts, how affection and distance are used to steer him, he reclaims the power he unknowingly gave away. He stops chasing explanation and starts observing intention. He realizes that not every emotional withdrawal needs fixing, and not every compliment needs chasing. He learns to sit in discomfort without bending his boundaries. And in that stillness, he becomes powerful, not because he dominates, but because he's unshaken. The true power dynamic that nobody talks about isn't between men and women. It's between awareness and ignorance. The unaware are always controlled by the aware. Emotional intelligence is the new form of strength. The man who understands his own emotions is immune to manipulation because his peace no longer depends on external validation. He listens without absorbing, feels without reacting, gives without losing. That is the highest form of masculine composure, not silence or detachment, but conscious sovereignty. When men reach that level of awareness, relationships change entirely. They stop being negotiations of need and become exchanges of respect. Affection is given freely, not strategically. Boundaries aren't walls, they're clarity. And women too benefit from this balance because authenticity replaces the silent war for emotional dominance. Love becomes less about control and more about connection, less about keeping power and more about sharing presence. The power dynamic nobody talks about is the one hidden in every unspoken rule, every text left unread, every compliment delayed just long enough to make you wonder. It's the emotional chess game society taught us to play without realizing it. But once you see the board, you no longer play, you observe. You no longer chase validation, you command respect through calm. And that calm, that unshakable awareness is the power no one can take away because it isn't built on control. It's built on consciousness. Every generation inherits its own version of the love story. The fantasy changes its clothes, but the promise stays the same. Find the right person and everything will make sense. Movies, songs, books, and social media all whisper the same message. Somewhere out there is the one who will complete you, understand you, heal you, and make life whole. It's a comforting illusion, one that keeps people chasing, dreaming, hoping. But at some point, reality enters quietly and dismantles it piece by piece. The collapse of the fantasy isn't an explosion. It's a slow unraveling, a dawning realization that what we were taught to crave was never real to begin with. The fantasy begins with idealization. We project perfection onto others and call it love. We build them out of our imagination, sculpting their flaws into charm and their distance into mystery. We mistake compatibility for chemistry and attraction for destiny. The excitement feels divine, the connection feels cosmic, and for a while everything aligns. But what's really happening is projection, our unmet needs, our unhealed wounds, and our secret longings are being reflected back to us through another person. They don't complete us, they mirror what we've been missing within ourselves. The illusion feels real because the emotional intensity is real. But intensity isn't love, it's the echo of our own inner emptiness calling for attention. When the fantasy collapses, it doesn't just expose the other person, it exposes us. It shows us how much of what we called love was actually attachment, control, and fear disguised as devotion. It reveals how we use the idea of romance to avoid solitude, how we turn relationships into distractions from self-confrontation. The one we were chasing was never a person. It was a feeling we were trying to recreate, a state of peace we hoped someone else could deliver. But no one can give you what you haven't given yourself. Love doesn't heal you by saving you. It heals you by reflecting what still hurts. This realization is painful because it kills the dream we were conditioned to worship. We were told that finding love was the ultimate purpose of life, the final prize. But when that illusion falls apart, men and women alike feel disoriented. They look around and wonder, if love doesn't complete me, what does? The collapse leaves silence, but inside that silence is the truth. Love isn't supposed to complete you, it's supposed to complement you. It's not supposed to be the destination, it's supposed to be the reflection of your growth. Men, in particular, struggle with this collapse because their self-worth is often tied to success in love. Society taught them that being desirable validates their masculinity, that being chosen defines their value. So when the fantasy crumbles, it feels like personal failure. But it's not failure, it's awakening. It's the death of illusion, not the death of love. The moment a man stops seeking the fantasy, he begins to understand real love. Not the kind that demands or saves, but the kind that simply is. A love that grows from clarity, not desperation. The collapse also exposes how modern culture thrives on fantasy. Dating apps, influencers, romantic comedies, all profit from the illusion that love is a product to be found, a perfect match to be algorithmically delivered. But love isn't found, it's built. And building requires truth, patience, and self-awareness, things fantasy cannot survive. The moment you strip away the illusion, what's left looks ordinary. Two imperfect people trying to understand each other, choosing to stay not because of magical chemistry, but because of shared effort and emotional honesty. That's love in reality. Quiet, imperfect, and far more meaningful than the movie version. When the fantasy collapses, something profound happens. You stop looking outward and start looking inward. You realize the love you were chasing externally was always an invitation to meet yourself more deeply. You begin to understand that fulfillment doesn't come from being adored, but from being aligned. Love becomes less about escaping loneliness and more about embracing authenticity. The people who once seemed like saviors now appear as mirrors, teachers who helped you uncover your blind spots. Some broke you open, others guided you gently, but all were necessary to lead you to yourself. The collapse hurts because it dismantles the dream that once gave life meaning. But in that destruction lies rebirth. You stop expecting someone else to be your peace, and you start becoming it. You stop seeking perfection and start valuing presence. You stop confusing butterflies with compatibility and drama with depth. And when that shift happens, love finally stops being a fantasy. It becomes truth. A truth that doesn't promise constant excitement, but offers deep connection. A truth that doesn't fill your void, but reminds you that you were never empty. The fantasy needed to die for love to live. The collapse isn't the end of romance, it's the beginning of awareness. It's the moment you stop worshiping the illusion of completion and start honoring the reality of connection. And once you've seen through the fantasy, you can never go back to chasing it. You stop searching for the one and start becoming someone whole enough to meet another whole person. That's where love begins, not in fantasy, but in truth. And truth, unlike fantasy, doesn't collapse, it endures. There comes a moment in every man's life when the noise begins to fade. The noise of expectations, performance, competition, and the endless chase for validation. It doesn't happen suddenly, it happens quietly, often after disappointment, heartbreak, or exhaustion. It's the moment when a man looks at the life he's built, the career, the relationships, the reputation, and realizes that despite it all, something inside him still feels hollow. That hollow space is not weakness, it's an invitation. It's the call for rebirth, for awakening, for the return to something he lost long ago, his awareness. The rebirth of masculine awareness isn't about becoming stronger in the physical sense. It's about becoming conscious in the emotional, spiritual, and psychological sense. It's about remembering who he is when the performance ends. For too long, men have been trained to live outwardly, to seek meaning through achievement, validation through success, and identity through approval. Every goal reached brought a momentary sense of pride, followed by a deeper sense of emptiness. Every love gained came with the silent fear of losing it. Every failure felt like death because his worth was tied to outcomes. The world told him to conquer, to lead, to dominate, but it never taught him to feel, to understand, to be. He was told to be the protector, but never shown how to protect himself from emotional chaos. He was told to be strong, but never taught that real strength is not the suppression of emotion, but the mastery of it. The rebirth begins when he stops running, when he stops chasing what the world told him he needs to be, and starts questioning why he wanted it in the first place. When he sits in silence long enough to hear the truth beneath the noise. That truth is simple yet terrifying. He has been living as an image, not as a man. The image served a purpose. It helped him survive, earn respect, attract love, but it also caged him. The rebirth happens the moment he realizes that the same mask that once protected him is now suffocating him. In this new awareness, he starts seeing differently. He begins to understand that masculinity isn't a performance of power. It's the embodiment of presence. It's not about control, it's about consciousness. It's the calm in chaos, the clarity in confusion, the ability to hold space for pain without being consumed by it. A man who has awakened to his awareness doesn't react impulsively. He responds deliberately. He doesn't need to dominate to feel powerful. He radiates a quiet strength that can't be shaken by circumstance. This kind of man doesn't chase validation because he has already met himself. This rebirth isn't about rejecting women or love. It's about approaching them from truth instead of need. Before awareness, a man seeks love to fill his void. After awareness, he shares love from his fullness. He no longer fears losing someone because he no longer fears losing himself. He doesn't confuse attention with affection or attraction with connection. He understands that love is not possession, it's presence. And because of that, he no longer plays emotional games. He becomes the kind of man who doesn't manipulate or compete. He simply stands grounded in authenticity. A man in his awareness stops seeing women as prizes or problems. He sees them as reflections, equal beings navigating their own illusions and awakenings. He doesn't blame, he observes. He doesn't withdraw out of pride, he withdraws out of peace. His strength comes from his ability to stay conscious even in conflict, to listen without defensiveness, to walk away without resentment. That kind of awareness is rare, but when it emerges, it transforms not only the man, but everyone around him. This rebirth isn't a return to old masculinity, it's an evolution beyond it. The old model of masculinity was built on dominance and suppression. The new model is built on depth and awareness. The old man sought to control his environment. The aware man seeks to understand it. The old man feared emotion. The aware man channels it. The old man chased power. The aware man is power. Because he no longer depends on anything external to define it. And when a man reaches this level of awareness, everything about his energy changes. He no longer speaks to impress, he speaks to express. He no longer seeks to prove, he seeks to align. He no longer fears solitude, he honors it. His life stops being about reaction and starts being about creation. That's the rebirth. The moment when he realizes that masculinity was never lost, only buried under the weight of expectation. The rebirth of masculine awareness is not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and profound. It's the moment a man steps out of the fog of conditioning and remembers who was before the world told him who to be. He becomes whole, not perfect, but whole. And in that wholeness, he finds peace, purpose, and power that no one can give or take away. That is true masculinity, not the performance, not the armor, but the awareness that freedom begins the moment he stops pretending and starts being.